Ah, there we go. All right, I think we're good to go. So sorry about that. We had some technical issues, but I think we have them all worked out now. I appreciate your patience, everybody. Welcome. I'm Mr. C, and I will be kind of talking to you every Wednesday at 8 o'clock, answering your questions about AP Human Geography to the best of my ability. Before we get too far into our broadcast, I wanted to go ahead and get everything started, kind of go over a few things with you. So, for example, it's important to point out that this is a review, so we're not going to cover everything that you will need to know for the test. We're not going to cover every concept and every vocabulary term and all that kind of stuff, but we are going to hit the major points, just give you a chance to kind of familiarize yourself with some things you may have learned early in the year, maybe have forgotten. Just kind of go over some things that are, some of the more important concepts. I'll be doing that at 8 o'clock on Wednesdays, and then my colleague name is Granquist, who you may have seen in some of the videos already, who will be doing it at 9:30, either on Wednesday or Thursday. We're still working out exactly what day the second broadcast will be. That's coming up. Also, one of the things that you will notice as you are going through the modules is that there is some video content, and there's also some written content, some textual content that goes along with that. And so we want to make sure that that you have access to that. So as you, I'm texting with my technical people right now. So if I look away, I'm working out some glitches. So if you have any questions as we go along, once again, continue to add to the question pool so that we can add to that. Okay. So once again, this is not necessarily designed to replace any classroom instructions from your teacher, just simply to supplement it, to kind of add to it, maybe give you a little different point of view or a little different perspective on some things, and kind of give you maybe a little different voice. Maybe I'll use some different examples or some different explanations of things, some things like that. So that's what's kind of what to expect. Excuse me. A couple other things that I wanted to chat a little bit about me. This is my 7th year teaching AP Human Geography. I've been teaching for 12 years. I have been to the AP reading, or the grading, which is where we read all of your wonderful writing, and kind of, this will be my 3rd year this summer. So I'm excited about that. I am by no means the most seasoned person on this topic, but I do have quite a bit of experience. So I'm here to answer your questions, and I'm here to be a part of that. As we go through the different units, there'll be a different unit every week. So you had a welcome unit this week, as well as our traditions unit this week. So hopefully that content is useful to you. Each week there will be a different kind of content. So this week was traditions. Next week will be population and migration. I may go through things in a different order than your teacher did, and there's no particular order that's better or worse. That's just how I've always done it. So that's the way that we're using it. So if you have questions, once again, as we go along, just let me know in the comments. I also may use, if there are questions that I am, for some reason, unable to answer, like there's a few things in today's question box that I'm not quite ready to answer today, I will try to use the question area to maybe send you some links to some stuff, or steer you in the directions of some things that you might want to know. Okay. All right. So as you may have guessed or seen from some of the videos that I've already done, as I'm a pretty informal person, pretty informal presentation style. So, hopefully that's something that you are familiar with and okay with and happy with. So let me go ahead and get started then on some of the questions that were presented. And really that's what I want to use this time for, more than anything else, is addressing your questions. So the more questions you have, the more that I will answer and address those. If you don't have very many questions, then I will just kind of fill the time with whatever, I may sing, I may dance, I may, do hand puppets, or, draw stick figures or something for you and do like a little play. I don't know. But anyway, you don't want that, so make sure the questions come in. All right. So I've got a couple of questions here that were submitted to the question page, and I want to go through those. And some of them are kind of content-based, and some are kind of more test structure-based. And this is actually a really good kind of way or good kind of place to discuss some of the test structures and things like that. Okay, let me start with a question here from Gabriella. Gabriella, thank you for your question. Actually, Gabriella quoted, and we'll come back to Nicole in just 1 second. Okay, so Gabriella's question says, can you discuss how we should go about addressing the free response questions, how to answer them in the best possible way, how many details, how long, how short, how to explain, justify, things like that. And that's a really good question. And in general, there's kind of two ways that I want to answer that question. First of all, is that's one of the topics and concepts that I have created for. So if you look at the list for week 1, there's a video that is called How to FRQ. And free response question, of course, is the primary way that we answer questions in human geography, and it kind of lays out the format that I use to teach my students how to do that. I highly recommend that. And as we go through the other units, you'll see some more practice examples and some more videos of how to do those things. So in general, I'm going to give you just some knowledge or some information that I feel that I've gleaned over the time of teaching the course and being a reader. In general, what I find is a lot of students struggle early on with the writing in this course because they tend to write as if they are writing for an English class. And in an English class is kind of different in the way that you write, in that you're going to write, you may use many more examples, you may use more exaggerated language, or really fancy vocabulary, and all of that's fine, except in human geography, your essays are timed. You have about 20 minutes apiece when you break down the 70-minute time period. And so really what you want to learn and what you want to work on is writing concisely. And one of the things I talk about in my video is the importance of answering the question. What does the question say? What does it want? Does it want you to identify, to explain, to analyze? How many examples does it ask for? That's how many examples you should put, is how many it asks for. And the other thing that's really important about writing for the course, and I would really like for you to watch that video first and then come back with more questions to follow up. But it's really important that when you practice writing, you practice planning to write. What I have found over time is that students like to just immediately start writing and pouring things out on the page without really stopping to think about what they're doing. And what I have found is that spending 2 or 3 or 4 minutes before each question actually planning out what you're going to write, one, makes your writing much higher quality. It makes your writing easier to read and to follow for the grader and the reader. And overall, it just helps you organize your thoughts and kind of reduces anxiety. So while you may have 20 minutes, per question, there's a lot to be gained by spending 3 or 4 of those minutes planning out what you're going to write. Okay. So in terms of long or short, I would say you really want to find the sweet spot in between. Because what I have found, reading student writing for a long time, is a lot of students will just dump everything they know about a topic on the page. That doesn't tell me that you know it. That tells me that you just have a bunch of stuff rattling around in your head, and it doesn't tell me that you know how to organize it and how to discuss it in an intelligent way. So too much information, too long, too rambling is not good. Once again, that's where that planning comes into place. I also found that students like to be very, very general about things. And I would recommend against that as well. You want to be as specific as you can and still answer the question, okay? So in general, that idea of having 3 essays, you have 70 minutes to write them, and setting aside 10 minutes or so of that 70 to do the planning part of your essay is very, very important. A couple of things also that I would recommend as you think about how to write for this course. One is read the question carefully and look at the verbs. What are the action verbs that they're asking you to do? If they're asking you to identify, then that's what you need to do. If they're asking you to explain, if they're asking you to analyze, that's what you need to do. You need to do what the question asks. And so you may want to practice looking at some practice writing prompts and say, what is that verb and how do I do that? One thing that you may want to do is go ask your teacher if they have access to verbs that are associated with what's called Bloom's taxonomy. And I might post this in the questions as well. So you can begin to associate those verbs with other verbs and know what they want you to do. Okay. Just a little bit about the process of writing these essays, or the process of grading them. You know, we are given a rubric that we are expected to follow pretty closely, and so you know, that's why it's important that you be specific, because we can't say, well, Tommy meant to say this or he meant to say that. We can't do that because we don't know you, we don't know your writing, we don't know what you meant, we know what you said. And so practicing those things, being specific, being very direct about your answer. And I just kind of want to reinforce a couple of things. I worked with a lot of students that I work with I have to break them of some bad habits in terms of, if I focus on the multiple choice and I nail the multiple choice, then I don't have to do well on the writing. And it just doesn't work that way. What I have found from grading is I will grade a lot of essays that have very little in them and just aren't, students just don't know and what to do and how to write them, or even some of the content. So what I've kind of recommended for my students is, if you are good at writing, if you are good at writing them, if you've practiced them, if you have spent time on them, if you know verbs, if you know how to answer the question concisely, you are at an advantage over a lot of students that simply aren't able to grasp or master that skill by the end of May. That doesn't mean that they won't ever master it. It just means that either on that day or in general, they just weren't there yet. And so the better you can be at writing, the more time you can put into that, the more practice you can put into that, the better you will be on that part of the test. And I think there is more to be gained in terms of how your grade turns out on the test from that. Okay. We had some other questions that were asked about what kind of things should we anticipate, and that's kind of hard to answer. They're really good about test security. No one knows what the questions are going to be. What I will recommend, though, is maybe going and looking at some of the past release questions, which we will also provide along the way a little bit, and say what has been done in the past and what parts of the outline or what parts of the course material have been missing from possible questions. So look at some of those questions and say, okay, they've talked about this and this and this. They like to talk about urbanization. They've had lots of questions about that. And so be thinking about what those kind of things might look like. Okay. All right. I'm being told that you have some questions coming up in the chat box, which I am not currently seeing those in the chat box. So I will come back to those in a few minutes after I look at some more of the web questions. So Nicole, I hope that answers your question a little bit. If not, feel free to post a reply, and I'll try to get back to that later. But that idea of using previous questions, comparing that to the outline, and kind of going from there. Okay. Also, Lashika had a similar question. So Lashika, I hope that answers your question as well about how to kind of prepare and which answers. So what I would recommend right now in terms of how to answer them is to go to, okay, I'm being told, Austin, ask your questions in the question forum so that I can see them. I'm not seeing the chat box right now. But I will get to those. So what I would recommend is to watch that video, how to FRQ, and then if you still have questions about that next week, go ahead and repost those in the week 2 question box or in the question groups, and I will follow up on those specific questions. But I really want you to kind of see what's out there and maybe work through the practice one that I have before you get into very specific Okay. All right. Ashanti had another question similar to that. Once again, I would recommend that you look at that video first, and then we'll come back next week if you have some more specific things. Wow, y'all are really asking some good questions here. Can you please summarize the urbanization chapter? I will not do that today, but we will get to the urbanization chapter. And if we have time here in a few minutes, I may talk about some of the highlights. All right, I want to get back to. So I have Macy ask a question about some good sources and resources. Excuse me, I'm having some trouble today. It really depends on the topic. I recommend to my students to get a prep book at this point of the review of the year. There's 3 good ones. There's one that's done by Kaplan. There's one that's done by Princeton Review, and there's one that's done by Barron. Any of those are good. There's flashcards that often go along with those that really help with vocabulary. You can get those at pretty much any bookstore, any Barnes & Noble. I mean, yeah, Barnes & Noble or any kind of bookstore like that. If you have people in older grades in your school, maybe that have taken the course before, you might want to ask them if they have a book lying around that maybe they used, and maybe you can use that instead of having to buy one. Those are some resources. The College Board site has some good stuff. Quizlet, I don't know if you're familiar with Quizlet. Quizlet is where you can go in and you can make your own review cards and things like that, and they are often saved, and other students can come in and get those. So you can actually find stuff that other people have done. And so those are some good sources to use. But that's kind of where I would recommend a starting point. If you've not seen the Martha Sharma vocabulary list, it is, I believe it's available on the AP website. Many of your teachers probably refer to the Martha Sharma site. If you get a vocab list from your teacher, it probably has some of her stuff on it, but she's a good resource for that as well. Check with your specific instructor and find out, kind of what they would recommend and what they would use. Those are some of the things that I personally recommend. Okay, I want to get to a couple of very specific content questions that are here. And we're going to kind of talk about these a little in more detail later, but I do want to talk about. I have some questions about the demographic transition model. Technically, that's next week, and I do have two videos on that. But since you asked the question, this again is Lashika, and I want to answer that question. I don't want to ignore that. And one of the things when we're talking about the demographic transition model, remember that we're comparing. It's a relationship between industrialization or urban growth and population. So how does population, not urban growth, excuse me, scratch that, economic growth and population change. So, and it does so by looking back at the history of Europe. So it looks at, 150, 200, 250 years of European and Western industrialism in order to kind of come up with a model. And a model is kind of a general prediction or general description of how phenomena work that we can use to compare other things to. And so when we talk about the model itself, what we'll see is looking back at the European context, as Europe changed industrially from a primary economy based on farming and agriculture, and with a very high birth rates and high death rates, with low life expectancy, with very high infant mortality, things like that. As that began to change, what they noticed was there was this overarching relationship to what happened to population. So as the economic system changed, so did the population. And basically, to make a long story short, as a country changed economically, the population changed much slower than that. And so it created some population booms and explosions and some issues of overpopulation that those countries had to deal with and eventually work their way through. So like I said, I have a lot more on this next week, so I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. But so when we look at that in a modern context, there are some questions that we have to ask. And one of those is, does that model work still? Does it still apply? And is it an appropriate model to use in order to get an understanding of what's happening today? So if we look at emerging economies in China or India or Southeast Asia, if we look at Mexico and Latin America, and we see those countries as their economies are changing, are we seeing the same kinds of trends? Okay, and so the issue is, what kind of change do we see? In general, these changes take place very, very, very slowly. At least historically they have. Now you could argue that to nowadays that these changes happen much more rapidly. So we're seeing India and China and Mexico industrialize very rapidly relative to previous historical eras. And so do those same patterns apply, and the same things kind of show up and illustrate? And that's a good question. I mean, that's one of the big arguments against the model, is it's not appropriate. Or is it appropriate? Does it explain the same things in the same way, looking at it, or is it as predictive as we think? And one of the problems that I think we end up seeing is that if we use it to be predictive, if we use it to try to dictate policy and say, okay, because of the model, we know this is the next step. What happens if we, for example, bring in modern technology for healthcare and contraception and family planning, and we drop those death rates, but we are unable to culturally make the changes necessary and economically make the changes necessary to get those birth rates to drop? How long can we as a society sustain to be in stage 2? And so I think there has to be a very careful discussion within those countries about whether or not the model is necessarily appropriate. Okay, and so Lashika's question is really dealing with the rate of change of these things. And from my experience and my reading and my understanding is that these changes happen very gradually. So you might see drastic changes from stage to stage, which you do see drastic changes from stage to stage. The difference is that those stages could last many, many, many years, and the rate of those may move quickly, or you may find countries who are unable to make some of those changes, and they end up stuck in some less than favorable conditions. So if I haven't necessarily clarified your question enough, that's I apologize for that. I would like to get back to that at some point. All right, let me look at a couple other questions that we have here. I'm seeing some questions that are deleted. I'm sorry about that. I hope I didn't turn you off on that. All right, I have a question here from Sharon, and Sharon is asking about kind of space-time relationships. And as a Star Trek fan, I'm kind of a fan of the space-time continuum, and it's the 30th anniversary of Back to the Future, so I'm very excited about space-time and how that works. Oh, that's not what we meant. One of the things that you may want to look at, and it's something that comes up quite a bit in the migration and the a little bit in industry and economic development and urbanization, is the idea of the gravity model. And the gravity model kind of talks about the relationship between the size of a place or the significance of a place and how that affects distance and time and kind of some space-time relationships and those kind of factors. So I might refer you back to that idea of the gravity model from that particular point of view. The idea being that the closer things are together, less time kind of affects things. Okay. All right, I'm still trying to find your questions on the chat, and I'm not currently seeing them. So, okay, I think we've got most of our technical issues worked out, which makes me very happy. Okay, I'm going to go here for probably about another 10 more minutes. If you have questions to submit to the question page, I'd be glad to answer those. All right. Okay. This kind of, there's some general questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Ashante had a question, and I missed it, and I apologize, Ashante. Let me answer your question about determinism versus geographic, environmental versus geographic determinism. And if I use one but not the other, am I wrong? And so here's kind of what I would say about that. I think you need to be familiar with different terms for different things. Sometimes different books and different geographers may use different terminology that is very, very similar. And so I think you should be familiar with both. For example, a couple of years ago, there was a essay question or a free response question that dealt with the Burgess model as an urban development model. And the Burgess model kind of talked about how urban land use was distributed through concentric rings. So some students learned it as the concentric ring model. Some students learned it as the Burgess model. So it's important that when you have two similar terms that you're familiar with both of them. And as far as would you be wrong on an essay if you use one but not the other, that's kind of hard to determine because the rubrics to the essays are not determined until after the tests are taken. One of the things that happens is when we get together to grade, there's a group that goes there ahead of time. They read through some essays and they take samples and they begin to develop a rubric from that. And so sometimes rubrics are really specific. Sometimes they're a little less specific. It really determines on the question and what the student responses are looking like. So in general, I wish I had an answer to that specific question about if this vocabulary term or that vocabulary term is right or wrong. I just can't answer that at this point. And so my response would be to that is know both of them. And if they ask for one or the other, make sure that you can use the one that they ask for. And that gets back to that issue of answering the question that they ask for and making sure that you are specific in that. So if it's a question that asks about geographic determinism, I would be able to talk about that. If it asks about environmental determinism, be able to talk about that. And so that's just a way to kind of cover your bases on that. By the way, if I don't know if you guys are familiar with at all with the work of Jared Diamond in his book Guns, Germs, and Steel and the sequel Collapse. But when it comes to kind of discussing and learning about determinism, those are really good resources. They're not the most exciting to read, but the concepts in them are really, really good. If you're interested in kind of brushing up on determinism, what I might recommend is if you have access to Netflix, go on to Netflix and find the National Geographic that talks about Guns, Germs, and Steel, which was his first book, nicely lays out the theory of his theories. He would say that they are not determinist theories. He would say that they are possibilist theories, which is what his second book, Collapse, is about, as kind of a reference back to that first book and kind of dispelling some of those beliefs. And so anyway, so that's a nice resource for that. Okay, so if you have those interests. So all right, I have just a few more minutes today. I know we got started a little late. This is kind of a short unit or so. What I want to do real quick is check if there's any more. Did I answer Sharon's question? I don't feel like I answered Sharon's questions very well. Sharon, I apologize. I'm gonna give you a better answer on that space-time question, but I'm gonna post it directly to your question on the, ooh, I have lots of stuff here. Okay. Okay, so Tina, is he saying we don't have to have any intro or anything like that in like we do in English class? That's a very good question, Tina. Since we're talking kind of about the structure of the test today, let me go ahead and answer that question. First of all, two things. First of all, I am not your teacher. You do what your teacher asks you to do, all right? Under no circumstance do you go into class tomorrow and say, this weird guy with the crazy beard on the internet said I don't have to do X, Y, and Z. No, that is not the case. I am a teacher and I understand that you need to do what they ask you to do. What I will say is this. When we are grading essays, we do not care if there is a conclusion. We do not care if there is an introduction. We care if you answer the question. Okay, so that is how they are different than you might see in a formal structured essay. Okay, now that being said, I am not here. If you go back and tell your teacher that I told you that you don't have to do what they tell you to do, then you are being a not very responsible student, or very nice or very kind to those people that work hard for you. So if you'd like to go back and add a conclusion and introduction, that's great. Do it at the end if you have time. Go back and flower it up and pretty it up and make it look nice at the end. But I would not spend time that could be committed on content and on structure and on those things by doing those kinds of more specific types of Englishy kinds of things. Okay, you don't have to have a thesis statement. Now, I will say other AP classes do. If you take WAP next year, or if you've already taken WAP, you know that you have to have those things. APUSH requires that. Euro requires that. Human geography is really just more about we need to see what you know. Okay. Another thing from Tina is, are there any good websites for released test questions? The College Board site itself has every released AP test question on it. Not the multiple choice, but it does have the released FRQs, and you can go on there and pull those up. You can look at them, you can practice those, and I recommend that you do. Later in this review, we're going to present some of those as well. So I would recommend that you kind of do that. Tina also asked for the prep book. Does it matter if they are current or a couple of editions behind? In general, I would say no. What I would do is to look at the outline, the AP outline that's on the College Board, that's in the course description that goes through everything. I always give my students that outline along with their vocabulary and say, okay, what is in here and what is not? And you may want to just kind of look at it and say, okay, most of this stuff will be the same, but you may see 2 or 3 things that are not. For example, they've added a lot of stuff about gender in the last couple of years that may not be in older editions, but most of it will be the same. If it's an issue of 1 or 2 years, you're probably going to be okay with that. Yes. How specific does the test get following Rubenstein or the textbooks? My understanding is vocabulary, basic key concepts. Okay, so Cora asked a question about differences following textbooks. So there's 3 or 4 textbooks that are kind of used throughout the course by different schools. Schools have those choices usually. The district that I teach in uses, whoa, I just had a light issue here, so hopefully you can still see me. So my school uses the AA text. Let's all pause for a moment of silence for the late, great Harm Doublé. He died recently. Anyway, so Doublé is one. The Rubenstein is one. And in terms of specifics and details, here's kind of where it gets complicated. It used to be that if you understood the concepts, you understood most of the vocabulary, you could get through the writing pretty well. you could probably do reasonably well on a multiple choice. The problem that we're having now, it's not a problem. It's ultimately a good thing. But the challenge, I guess, is that now we're starting to see them integrate different concepts together into your FRQ. So really what you're seeing is not just a FRQ about one topic, but it may integrate 2 or 3 together, which creates a really rich testing environment, a really rich quality kind of thing. The difference is that really requires you to know your stuff. Yeah, so in terms of specifics, it's not going to be impossible. I'm sorry, it's going to be impossible for you to know every single detail there is. Okay, so what I tell my students is know your vocab, know your concepts. What are the overarching connections? How are things related to each other? What are the big important things, and what are the details that make those important things important? So there may be things that the author talks about in passing, or examples that they use that you may or may not need to know. But think about it in terms of what would be a reasonable example of this as opposed to maybe a more obscure one. What are some things that are more common ways that this idea manifests itself as opposed to maybe some very, very minutia kind of thing. So yeah, I know it's hard when you get into very specifics. I will say that one of the things I like about this course is that it, compared to some others, it doesn't have nearly as many of those. Okay. Okay. Eric Martinez asked a really good question. I've been there, Eric. I feel your pain. What do you do when you get to an FRQ and you have no idea how to approach the question it's asking? My response to that would be move on, go to the next one. If you look at a question and you've looked at it for a couple of minutes and you are just drawing a complete and total blank, move on to the next question. Don't spend too much time on something that you don't know. Spend time on things that you do, so you can do those really, really well. And then at the end, if you have time, you can come back and stare at the page. Or doing those other questions may actually remind you of what that's about or what you need to know for that. Okay, guys, I'm having some technical issues. I gotta go. Oh gosh. Whoa.